Hi, this is Brennan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and today I'm talking about Return of Condor Heroes and how that's impacted some of my gaming lately. This is something that I'm going to do a blog entry for this, kind of like I did with the other one, where this is really for helping me get out some of my thoughts. Some of these will be a little crude and rough and not exactly well thought out. I apologize. I apologize that that it's not a diamond, but that's just sort of how I use the podcast. And then hopefully by the time I get to the blog, I have a little bit more refinement in the idea. And I usually will be posting these podcasts along with the blog entry itself. And for this one, I'm also going to be posting links to the readings that Kenny and I have been doing of Return of Condor Heroes. This is something that's become uh, pretty pretty helpful for some of my campaign planning. So I want to talk about it. But if you guys aren't familiar with Return of Condor Heroes, it's a Louis Cha book, and it's the second part in a three-part story. It's a trilogy basically, and each story is about 4 volumes and 10 chapters each. So it's quite long. It's a time investment, but it's well worth it. And if you don't have the time to read the books, you could watch the series. Though me and Kenny actually crunched the numbers, and I think you're actually better off time wise reading the books because it's faster to read the books than it is to watch the series. Series are usually about 50 episodes, an hour each, so you're still looking at 50 hours if you watch the series. So, anyways, one of the things we've been doing is we're doing it 5 chapters at a time, which I'm enjoying because normally when I read stuff, I read it fast. I read it in like a day, 3 days. I try to get it done in a reasonable time frame so that it's not something that's just sort of that I'm slowly working my way through. But for these podcasts, we need to do 5 chapters at a time. That's just sort of the structure we have. And it's very similar to how I did the Strange Tales stuff before. And that means we can't just do the entire book and then talk about every chapter because it all kind of blurs together when you do it that way. So I'm reading 1 chapter a day, and I'm finding that enormously beneficial in that it gives me a different perspective on the story. I'm focused on details that I wouldn't focus on otherwise. I'm thinking about aspects of the story that I wouldn't think about because I would already be 2 chapters ahead by the time I get to that thought, and it makes it a little bit more memorable to me. So, my memory's not the greatest in the world. I think I have a pretty shoddy memory, but it definitely I definitely remember better when I'm doing a single chapter a day. And I've kind of been approaching Strange Tales the same way. This is something where I've been, if there's one thing out there that I go back to more than anything else, is Strange Tales, and I'm going through it again, but this time I'm doing one entry at a time in one of the larger volumes, so that it's very slow, but it's also it really gives me a lot more ideas when I do it that way. So again, this is just sort of an odd observation I've had with this process where it's counterintuitive to me because I would normally be inclined to read something quickly, and to be honest, that's how I normally do read something. I'm not usually going to give something this amount of time and spread it out so long, but every once in a while I'm finding that I kind of prefer to do that. So that's what when it's especially if it's something I want to kind of really sink my teeth into and think about. So again, not much to do with the topic of discussion, but it's just sort of a side note that I noticed that. And I think what I want to talk about today is sort of family, because, and by family I don't just mean literal family. I mean, martial family, sworn siblings, other kinds of social ties. This is something that it's not unique to Wuxia at all. It's not unique to the time period or the place. Family is sort of a universal thing, and it's something that's very easy to overlook in an RPG for very good reason. Actually, it's the sort of thing that can be a pain to deal with. There are all kinds of uh, potential pitfalls that you could encounter as a GM or as a player dealing with this. And so a lot of times you either avoid it or you minimize it. And I think there's valid reason for not making it the center of attention at all times. At the same time, I've increasingly been using family in most of my games, and in particular in the Wuxia games. and I'm making use of family in new ways as I've been thinking more and more about Return of Condor Heroes again, and looking at things like the relationship between Yango and Guofu, who's the daughter of Guo Jing and Wang Rong, and again, I'm going to spoil some stuff. So if you don't want to know what happens in Return of Condor Heroes, you might want to stop listening now. I think that if you're a fan of it, you probably already know this, but I just want to lay out there is a spoiler here. But Guofu is one of the most important characters in the book because not only is she sort of antagonistic to Yangor, and in her most innocent form, she's maybe a pest to him, but midway through the book, she starts making some decisions that they're not villainous. She doesn't quite cross the road into villainy, but she cuts off Yangor's arm in a moment of rage, and that has catastrophic consequences. I mean, just the arm itself is obviously something, but it also leads him down some roads, and she also poisons him and his lover Zhao Longnu with two needles, mistaking him for Li Mochu. So she didn't mean to, but she very rashly used the needles, and because it was at a crucial moment, a lot of other stuff was going on. The end result of this is that it leads to a situation where it seems like Zhao Longnu is going to die, and that there's not much they can do about it. And so she basically ruins his life on multiple occasions, and it's all due to these rash decisions that she makes. But she's the daughter of Guo Jing and Huang Rong. Guo Jing is the sworn brother of his father, and Guo Jing and Huang Rong are one of the closest things that he has to an actual family. I mean, they're not his parents. His mother died when he was very young, and his father, who was not a nice guy, was killed when he tried to lay a palm on Huang Rong, and he was poisoned. And so it's there's a whole side talk we could get into on that, but I'm going to avoid it. But basically, he's got the Guo family, and he has people like Wu Yongfeng, who's sort of like I guess you could see, sort of like a sworn grandfather. He's in the translation that I'm currently reading. He calls him a godfather, but he very much functions. He has a paternal relationship to Yango. However, he does not survive the entire book. Another spoiler. So the most long lasting family relationship he seems to have is the one with Guo Jing and Huang Rong. And so he can't just escape this connection that he has with Guofu. And there are benefits to the relationship he has with Guo Jing. Guo Jing is a great hero. He has all kinds of respect and connections in the martial world. And so, again, you don't want every family relationship to be like the one between Yango and Guofu. That would not be a good situation to constantly throw at the party. But you can have those kinds of relationships, and you can have the kind of relationship that maybe he has with Guo Jing and with Huang Rong. The thing is to have a complete picture of all these different relationships. Some of them are going to be good, some of them not so good, but then taken together, they form a network that produces obligations and duties and responsibilities. And again, I can't emphasize enough. This isn't just a matter of this being Wuxia, and therefore these obligations are somehow more important. I think that these are obligations that if you live in even a modern family, you can appreciate. I have family obligations, and I can't just shirk them. And so it's a sort of a easy thing to grasp, and you don't have to this isn't as much about sort of authentic settings issues as it is about creating interesting family drama. And so that's what I'm trying to do. I'm not as interested in the in that other aspect of it at this moment. I'm interested in sort of the human drama that player characters can easily connect to. And so what I want for the players to sort of, if they have a mom character, to sort of be able to understand that as a mom character, as something that they could connect to in real life. If they have a character who's a brother, to sort of be able to appreciate that relationship, from either what they know of their own relationship with a brother or with a sibling or someone who's like a brother or brothers that they've seen, and so and I find it produces a very interesting tempering effect on the players. They you can sort of take a murder hobo, and if you surround them with people that have affection for them like a family would, it changes the way that character acts. That character still might be a murder hobo. He still might go around killing people or doing whatever that character does. But you'll notice in the presence of those family members a change. And I think it's often a missing component in campaigns. Again, like I said before, with good reason sometimes. But if you take the time and effort to sort of draw out the different family members, and don't just sort of don't just say, okay, you got a brother and here he is. Like, really think, okay, what makes this brother tick? Why? And it doesn't. And again, you don't want it to all be good and bad. It's it's got to just be different personalities with different goals and interests, and the commonality is the family. So I've been doing, I've been just thinking about that more and trying to apply it more. And you can sort of see it in my Lady 87 campaign. You can see it in my Disposable Disciples campaign. I think that it's producing some interesting results, sort of bringing more of that into focus. It's again not something that I always do, and it's something that does tend to sort of arise in different forms. I've had characters get married. I've had characters have children, but now I'm sort of trying to focus more on like the parent relationship, the brother sister relationship, the relationship with different cousins and things like that. I'm finding that as a really helpful anchor for characters. It's something that we if you followed our we had a campaign called Storms of the Martial World. That in that one there were some characters whose parents were important and extended family were important, and it really paid dividends in the campaign. And I'm finding that here in our Lady 87 campaign, it's important. I think I'm also finding that the GM has certain responsibilities when it comes to family members, because they're the sort of tools that if you abuse them, you could really turn the players off to the idea of having family, be a thing in the campaign. And so I'm trying to be very careful about it. I'm trying to be thoughtful in how I approach it, and I'm making a point of having enough good, enough bad, that in the end players will regard it as something to be desired. They won't, because I think if you make every family relationship dysfunctional, then they're going to do what people do in the real world. They're going to just avoid their family, and you can invoke things in the setting that might make that harder, like the filial piety or whatever. But at the end of the day, these are martial heroes. They can still ultimately do what they want, and I think that that you're better off, making family that is desirable for them to be around. With the occasional difficult relative, the occasional really difficult relative, but you want it to be kind of balanced. And I'm finding that works. And that doesn't mean that there aren't complications. Like in one of my campaigns, the player characters have found out that their mother is this great martial hero from the past. And it's a perfectly healthy, functional, good relationship. They get along with the mother. She gets along with them. But the complication is she's wanted by the Empire. And so that's forcing them to make some choices. But none of it is something where they resent the mother. It's not producing an issue with them not wanting family ties, because they still are gaining a lot from that relationship. She's teaching them techniques. She's giving them insights into what's going on around them in the world. So I feel like if you do throw a complication in like that, there should be some benefits that make the complication worth their time. Otherwise, like I said, they might just take off, or they just won't want to engage that kind of thing again when you bring it up to them. So again, this is something where this is all sort of really stemming from some of the focus of me and Kenny's discussions where we've been talking about the characters and some of the things that come up. And one of them is this sort of, the different relationships that are important to Yangoa and in particular the family relationships. I think also the relationships that operate within a sect. A sect is also a little bit like a family, and some of the language used to describe sect connections are familial. So taking that approach as well, for example, in Return of Condor Heroes, Li Mocho is the villain, but she also is part of the same sect that Yangor is part of. They're both part of the Ancient Tomb sect, and she is described as his martial uncle. And so I think that and again, this is translation, so take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. I'm not an expert on the language, but it's definitely a type of relationship that has meaning in the book, even if it's not a perfect one. And you can sort of apply those kinds of connections with the sex and the so as an example, one character that came up is Yun Wan, who's a former member of the sect that their mother belonged to, and he would have been sort of similar to a Li Mochu type character, but that was a completely sort of, I don't know what the word, a poisoned relationship. There's no good blood there. So he's sort of the antagonistic martial uncle. But then in the other end of things, they have the Iron God Mung character who, when they first met him, he just seemed like kind of a little bit of a dope, like a really crude sort of martial bully who just, is abusing the local population and kind of involved in petty crimes and owns like a gambling hall, and he's just kind of like a thug. He's not really he wasn't particularly terrible, but he also wasn't somebody that you would expect to have any amount of righteousness and any amount of sort of like lofty aspiration. But what they found out about him was that he was once something of a pupil of their mother. He wasn't a member of her sect, but he admired her greatly. She taught him, particularly in terms of just how to look at the world and how to survive. And she also taught him a little bit of what he knows about martial arts. And so there was that tutelage relationship that made him like their martial uncle. So there was some debate over whether to call him a brother or martial uncle, but they ended up calling him a martial uncle. And so again, it's become an interesting relationship, and it's one that's largely beneficial to the party. They can go to Iron God Mung, and he's helped them escape from the city unnoticed. He's let them know when the authorities are after them. And in a campaign like the one I run, that stuff matters. That can mean the difference between getting caught by the Empire and not getting caught by it, by having to deal with 10 Yao surrounding them in an alley, or escaping without any problems. So in fact, it was a real shame. Our last episode that we recorded, we had a technical issue with the recording, and so in the end, you don't catch all of these details. I think some of the Iron God Mung stuff you can hear, but some of the other stuff that is not totally clear because my audio cuts out. And there's what we determined, and this is totally aside from the talk, but what we determined was that it was because of normally I start the calls on Skype, and somebody else had started the call, and so the recorder was going through too many pathways or something, and it must have triggered a problem. But either way, there is a podcast of those sessions, so you can sort of go and listen to them and hear what I'm talking about. So the Lady 87 campaigns, they might not be quite as engaging as I'm describing because it's a bunch of people playing a RPG. So you're going to have to sit through a lot of dice rolling and small talk to get to the stuff I'm talking about. But when we're at the table, that's the stuff that we're experiencing, and so I think it's again, I think a lot of this stuff is really coming from the Return of Condor Heroes stuff that me and Kenny have been talking about. And it's funny because when I started the Lady 87 campaign, I really imagined it as a Gulong type thing. And if you follow me, you know that I really like Gulong, and I like stuff based on Gulong. And I think it's he sort of does the characters born the wrong side of the tracks. And it's interesting that it's kind of gone from being a Gulong campaign to being a Louis Cha campaign, and I kind of like having both elements present. It's a little bit more of a rich experience, I think. I really was gonna make this all Gulong, and then I think in the end it's a little better that it's more balanced. Uh, but and again, if you're unfamiliar with Gulong, I would recommend going to a place called Wuxia World and checking out a story called Heroes Shed No Tears, which was translated by Deathblade, who is writing the Legends of Ogregate book. He's a good translator, and it's a really excellent story. But there's also another story I would recommend called Sword of the Third Young Master, and you can probably find that online at various places. I think I found it on a translation forum, and there's the fan translations all over, and somebody had a really good sort of edit. Like different people will translate them, and then somebody will come along and try to bring the translation together so that like all the character names are the same and everything's cohesive and makes sense. And so I found a good one of that, and I really enjoyed that story. But if you're not familiar with him, check that out. Watch a movie like Death Duel or Swordsmaster, both drawn from the same material, or Magic Blade, and you'll get a good sense of what Gulong is all about. And definitely check out a movie called Heroes Shed No Tears. That's one of my favorite sort of Gulong inspired films, and it's done by Choi Yuen, so it's an excellent movie. Um, but again, this campaign was originally intended to be like a Gulong story, and it is, but it's also got more Louis Cha now and some other elements, and I think oh, and you know what? Also, there's another movie I would recommend. It's not based directly on a Gulong story, but if you see the movie Reign of Assassins with Michelle Yeoh, that is intended to feel like a Gulong story, and so it definitely has that vibe to it, I think, and I would recommend it just to get a sort of a sense of that. It's sort of it's a little darker. His stories are a little darker, and you just kind of got to experience them. There's another book called The 11th Son that's a good translation of one of his stories. It's worth checking out. But anyways, this campaign has become, just because I've been, every week I do a recap of the 5 chapters and we talk about them. It's been on my head, and I find that's inescapable. When you're working on stuff or when you're running a campaign, whatever you're sort of breathing in tends to work its way in. Even stuff like that's not related to it. Like I've been doing these Babylon 5 discussions with Adam, where we watch Babylon 5 and we talk about the episodes, and I think we've been doing this since the end of the summer, the beginning of fall, and we're now in the 5th season. We got 10 episodes left. And I've been very surprised at the amount of Babylon 5 stuff that's made it into my campaign. Not like directly, like you wouldn't like look at it and go, that's obviously Londo, but there are definitely things that are creeping into my campaigns that are inspired by some of the things that have happened in Babylon 5. If I watch a lot of Doctor Who, suddenly time travel makes its way into my games. That just kind of, what tends to happen. And so in this case, this campaign has become a real blend of Gulong and Louis Cha, and so I think that's good. It's a nice combination, and it's a difficult balance to strike, because what I find is you sort of have the darker pull of the Gulong stuff with the, I don't know, you could say more aspirational pull of the not that Gulong isn't aspirational, but there's like a darkness to it. There's like you feel like it's written by somebody who spent much of his time in bars and strip clubs and just sort of think like looking at things from a very different perspective. And the Louis Cha stuff is, just in my opinion, my very humble opinion, it's a little bit more optimistic, in the sense that the characters, the heroes feel more rewarded for their efforts. I'll put it that way. But again, it does depend on the story. There's always exceptions. I don't want to one of the things that sometimes happens when we talk about wuxia is we lay down rules that people feel like they have to follow. And I think that's the worst thing you can do. I think it's important to remember it's like any other genre. It's always, capable of growth. If you look at Gulong, you see all these other influences coming in. Even things like Hemingway make their way in there. And so I think that you, you know, you don't want to be too rigid, because the thing that makes an individual wuxia movie interesting isn't that, oh, it hits all the dots on wuxia. Yeah, this is a super wuxia movie. It's that, no, they added the element of, oh, we're gonna make this have a little bit of a Nosferatu feel, or a little bit of this. They're pulling in other flavors that make it more interesting. So, I think the worst thing you can do is say, no, it's got to be these five things, and if it isn't, it's not right. And it's, that's not this. You're not going to have a long term campaign that way. I'm a very you know, I'm just a fan of the genre. I'm not like an expert. I try not to approach these things too academically. But the one thing I will say that I feel pretty confident about, just because I've been running campaigns for lengths of time now, and they haven't really faltered unless I've wanted them to falter because I want to do something different, is that I think that you are you're better served, allowing yourself to bring in other elements on occasion, because if you don't, you're eventually going to get bored. I mean, it's sort of like if you ran a fantasy campaign that always felt like, and I'm just using this as an example because it's well known. I think it's a great story. I don't have anything against it. I grew up reading it and I liked it. I like R.A. Salvatore stuff. But I just want to use it as an example because I think that you'll get what I mean when I bring it up. But if you had every single campaign, operate like the Icewind Dale trilogy, you never allowed anything else to come in, it would get boring, and your campaign wouldn't last that long. You could probably do a pretty long campaign on all Icewind Dale stuff, but I mean, eventually you're gonna have to bring in some other influences. And so I think that's the way to think about wuxia. You can't even if you're just like if you're just doing if you're doing like one thing all the time, it eventually people do tend to lose interest. And I will say this: wuxia itself is a pretty vast genre in terms of what it can support. I think it has a lot of elements that you can that can be drawn on endlessly. But I think that the way that I would say not to think about it when you're running it is to avoid treating it like it's a museum artifact. You want to have fun, and so and I don't know how I got on this topic because I'm very far from what I was talking. So I'll try to wind this back to my original point. But I think it's important because it has come up. I have talked to people, and by the way, I've been seeing a lot of wuxia stuff online, which I think is super exciting. I think I've been seeing a lot more people blogging about their games. I've been seeing a lot more people streaming their games. I've been seeing a lot more wuxia games in general being made, and I think there's a lot of reasons for that. But I think one of the major ones has probably got to be the sort of boom in accessibility to the genre, just because of the internet and things like that, and the fact that like when I first got into it, you would go to the video store and get what you could. Now you can see everything, and I think what that is allowed for is people to get a better sense of what the genre really can encompass. Even if they were fans before, you might find an angle that you didn't even think about before, because you say, oh, I didn't know about this director, and now I'm suddenly aware of this whole sort of subgenre within the genre that's would work great in a game. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is I think we're hopefully what won't happen is what people won't start rolling their eyes at us. But I think it's good that there's so much out there, because the way that I've always run wuxia campaigns is I've always like again, this is before I made Ogre Gate, but like whenever, like if I was running a 3E wuxia or martial arts campaign, without fail, I'd go out and buy every book that I could find that was in any way connected to martial arts or wuxia for RPGs, simply because I needed as much resources as I could get into the campaign. And so I think the more people we have making stuff, the better, and the more people we have playing stuff, the better. And hopefully, as especially as you see more of this, some of these other genres gaining traction, like Shan stuff, I think we're gonna, I think we're gonna see some interesting things. And and so, you know, but I think the one thing I can contribute to the conversation here is that what I've seen in my own campaigns that's made them survive has been number one, not taking it too seriously, and realizing that it's a genre that's meant to be fun and engaging, and that you can mess up and continue going, and you don't have to get everything right every time. But number two, not shying away from doing what the great wuxia writers and great wuxia directors themselves did, which is bring in other sources of inspiration to add an additional flavor to it. Again, you at a certain point, it's not wuxia anymore, but it's it can remain within the genre as long as you sort of have a strong enough feel for it. And I'm gonna have to stop the podcast now because I have real world things happening around me. So I will let you go, and I've been going for 30 minutes anyways, and I will talk to you later.